Chioma was the jewel of her mother's eye, raised to believe that the world owed her a crown. She walked like royalty, spoke like nobility, and looked down on anyone who didn't shine as brightly as she imagined herself to. Her presence was always announced by the sound of heels and the soft jingling of gold bangles. To Chioma, life was a stage, and she was always the leading actress. When news spread across the land that Prince Tari of the royal family would be choosing a bride from among the people, Chioma and her mother saw it not as a possibility, but a certainty. Her mother, Madame Ifioma, was a woman of influence and pride. She had spent years preparing her daughter for moments like this, convinced that beauty, poise, and charm were enough to secure a throne. They began preparing at once. The finest clothes were ordered from the city. The most expensive perfumes were bought from foreign lands. They rehearsed smiles, royal greetings, and perfect curtsies, as if the crown had already been placed on Chioma's head. They even practiced how Chioma would wave to the people once she became queen. But while they dreamed of gold and rehearsed for royalty, something far greater was blooming elsewhere. In a quiet part of the village lived Zuri, a humble girl with a gentle spirit. She had no jewels, no gowns, and no famous name. What she had was kindness. Every day, she walked barefoot to school, her books tied together with worn fabric. She helped her sick neighbors, shared her lunch with children who had none, and stayed up late to help her younger siblings with their studies. People often overlooked Zuri, not because she was invisible, but because she didn't shine with outward glamour. She wore simple clothes and braided her hair herself. She didn't have the confidence of Chioma or the support of a powerful mother. But she had a heart full of light, and one pair of eyes never failed to see that light. A young man, seemingly poor and ordinary, watched Zuri closely. He was known simply as Tari, a delivery boy who always wore a simple shirt and a knowing smile. He carried packages across town, rode an old bicycle with a torn seat, and often helped elders lift heavy bags at the market. Few paid attention to him. To them, he was just another village boy trying to survive. But few knew that behind his quiet service lay a secret far grander than anyone could imagine. Tari wasn't a delivery boy by necessity, he was the crown prince himself, living in disguise. Prince Tari had grown tired of palace life and its endless pretenders. He wanted to understand the people he would one day rule. And most importantly, he wanted to find a woman who would love him, not his title. One morning, while walking through her school compound, Zuri was approached by a man in a black suit. His steps were calculated, his posture regal, and in his hand was a card that glimmered in the sun. Without a word, he handed it to her and turned to walk away, vanishing into the crowd. It was an invitation to the royal ball, an event announced to be the place where Prince Tari would choose his future bride. Zuri stood frozen, her hands trembling as she read the elegant calligraphy embossed with the royal seal. She couldn't understand why someone like her, who had never even seen the palace gates, would receive such an invitation. She clutched the card to her chest, unsure of what to do. She thought of throwing it away, convinced it was a mistake. But something within her stirred, a voice that whispered of destiny. That evening, whispers began to spread. People said Zuri had visited a grand boutique in the city. It was a place she had never dared to enter. Yet that day, she had been escorted inside. They said a kind stranger had paid for a gown, a sky-blue dress that shimmered like stars. Tailored to her form, it looked like it was made from moonlight itself. The tailor, known for dressing royalty, had said he had never seen a customer so polite and humble. Zuri never spoke of the dress, or who had paid for it. She wore no pride, only quiet gratitude. People in the village speculated, some with awe, others with jealousy. But Zuri remained the same, soft-spoken, kind-hearted, and graceful. When the night of the ball arrived, the royal palace was flooded with light, music, and guests dressed in the richest fabrics. Musicians played harps and drums. Fountains danced to the rhythm of the night. Chioma arrived first, glittering in red silk and dripping in ambition. Her arrival was grand. She stepped out of a chariot surrounded by attendants and walked into the palace like it already belonged to her. She greeted guests with a rehearsed smile, fluttered her lashes at nobles, and waited eagerly to be announced as the future queen. Madame Ifioma stood nearby, her eyes scanning the room, already imagining where she would sit at court. But then the grand doors opened and in walked Zuri, dressed in sky blue, glowing with simplicity and grace. She turned every head without trying. There were no trumpets, no grand announcement. But her presence silenced the room. People whispered among themselves, pointing subtly. Chioma's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Zuri move gracefully through the crowd. Something had shifted. The spotlight had moved, and she could feel it slipping from her fingers. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. Trumpets sounded from the golden staircase. The prince appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed in royal robes, his crown resting lightly on his head. But as he descended, gasps echoed through the hall. He was no stranger. He was Tari, the delivery boy, the same young man who had carried packages through the market, who had offered smiles and helped villagers without expecting anything in return. He walked slowly, each step filled with purpose. As he reached the floor, his eyes searched the crowd and found Zuri. Without hesitation, he walked to her, gently took her hand, and knelt before her. There was no need for words. The message was clear. He had chosen her not for her beauty, her status, or her wealth, but for her heart. The prince had hidden his identity to see the hearts of men and women. And it was Zuri's heart he had seen most clearly. Humiliated, Chioma left the palace in tears. That night, bitterness grew in the heart of Madame Ifioma. She could not accept defeat. Furious, she picked up her phone and called in a favor, a dark one. She summoned men from the shadows, giving them Zuri's picture and ordering them to ensure the girl would disappear. But fate has a strange way of protecting the innocent. One of the men sent to harm Zuri was a feared gang leader named Jagan. When he looked at the photograph, something in him paused. The girl in the picture, Zuri, was the daughter of a man who had once saved his mother's life. Jagan could never forget it. Papa Zuri had paid for his mother's surgery years ago and disappeared without asking for anything in return. Rather than carry out the cruel order, Jagan turned to the palace. He reached out to the royal guards and informed them of the plan. Guards arrived swiftly. Chioma and Madame Ifioma were taken away in silence, charged with conspiracy and attempted harm against a royal guest. The villagers, once unsure of Zuri's worth, now saw the truth. She was not just chosen by the prince, she was protected by destiny itself. Jagan was rewarded with honor, a house near the city gates, and a job as part of the royal security team. His loyalty was remembered by the royal family and celebrated quietly at the palace. Weeks later, the kingdom gathered once again, this time for a wedding. Under the African sky, beneath swaying palm trees and golden drapes, the prince and Zuri were joined as husband and wife. Birds flew overhead, drums beat in joy, and petals rained from the balconies. The people cheered not because Zuri had become queen, but because someone pure had been lifted high. It was a day of joy, healing, and hope. Children danced in the fields, elders sang songs of praise, and young girls looked to Zuri with newfound dreams. After the vows were exchanged, Prince Tari addressed the crowd. His voice carried across the open space, strong and sincere. I searched the kingdom for a queen, not of beauty, nor riches, but of heart. I disguised myself to see the truth behind faces. And what I found was Zuri, a woman who loved, served, and smiled without expecting anything in return. She is my crown, and she will be your queen. And so, the poor girl became a queen, not because she was the most beautiful or the most admired, but because she was the most true. Her reign began not in grandeur, but in gratitude. And the story of the hidden prince and the humble girl lived on in the hearts of the people forever.